Hello, this is Tamara Caulder Richardson. Some people maybe know me as the Southern Belle Medium. And welcome to the Seeking Heaven, the Near-Death Experience and Other Phenomena show. Tonight, we have a very special guest for you, and that's Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, who is a near-death experiencer, physician, and healer. And tonight, we're going to have a chat with him, and we're going to discuss his near-death experience, his experience for us spiritually, and who he is, and who he has become, and projects he's working on. So I wanted to welcome you to the show, Heaven.
It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me, Tamara.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for being here. And I thought that before we got too much into your near-death experience, I know you're a physician and you are also an emergency room doctor. And one of the things that I wanted to know, did you ever encounter that other people mentioning a near-death experience or anything spiritual? I mean, certainly you probably did in the medical field, right? Any stories there?
Yes. If I could offer just one clarification, I'm actually not a near-death experiencer. I have not had a near-death experience, but I have had numerous shared death experiences.
That's it, with your brother?
With my brother, with patients in the emergency department. One that people may have heard of before is a near-death experiencer named Jeff Olson, who was in a car crash, and it took the life of his wife and his 14-month-old son and nearly took his life. He was flown to my emergency department, to the trauma center, and when I went in to see him, he was unconscious on the gurney, and there was a team of providers taking care of him. Above the gurney in the air was his recently deceased wife, Tamara, and I experienced her and communicated with her. And I had a number of experiences like that in the emergency department.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Now it's all coming back to me. I knew you had a shared experience with your brother, and I was trying to understand the tie-in. Wow. Okay. Well, I met Jeff Olstein when I guess it was maybe 6 years ago at an afterlife conference. And he was doing the book signing, and then afterwards a group of us talking, and he said, my wife was named Tamara. That's how he remembered. And I thought it was so unusual, and he did too. Yeah, he also has an amazing story. So I didn't realize that. So did you, wow. So during that
I'm the physician in his book that experienced his wife in the trauma room, and out of respect to me, because I wasn't ready to talk about it at that time, he never mentions my name in the book, but that's me in the book.
Okay, it's all coming together. Okay, I did not know that. So okay, so when this happened, I guess, you know, you've come out, you're out of the box, having these experiences or these shared experiences. Tell me about that, with far as how that happened, and when did you, start waking up? I mean, obviously you're, an eternal spiritual being, but when did this start feeling like this is a real phenomena?
It started very early for me in my life. And in fact, it felt so natural and normal to me. I never contemplated the question about when and how this started until I started in the last few years to talk about my experiences, which I had not spoken about for pretty much my whole life. And when I started to share, people would ask me this question: when and how did this start for you? And I really had to dig into my past, and I finally realized it started shortly after my 12th birthday. Shortly after my 15-year-old brother, died in a farm accident. And when I was still a teenager, my brother started coming to me and giving me messages. Initially, it started with just voices, and then it evolved to where I would start to see things sometimes. Sometimes I would see the messenger that was bringing the message. And so by the time I became an emergency physician and stepped into that role, I was having these experiences frequently enough that I was accustomed to it. So when I had that profound experience with Jeff Olson, for example, we sent him off to the operating room. I took off my gown and shoe covers and walked back out into the other part of the department, finished my shift, and went home, and never expected to see him again. And then a month later, a nurse who also had a very spiritual experience together with me that day. She came and insisted that we go and talk to Jeff Olson about what happened, and I was not inclined to do that. I was very reluctant, as a matter of fact, and she kind of drugged me up to his hospital room and insisted that we share with him what I'd experienced in the trauma room, and that's when he told me about his near-death experience, his out-of-body experience at the scene of the accident. And he and I have been fast friends since. So I've had a lot of experiences like that in the emergency department, sometimes when people were dying and sometimes when people were being born.
Really? I'd like to know the differences. I mean, this is fascinating. I did not realize you were the same. That makes sense, the tie-in, the same person that was in the book. So can we go back to your brother and how that came? Because you said people that would bring the messages. So are we talking angels?
Well, different people use different words to describe things. Some people talk about angels, others talk about guides or messengers. Some people talk about a dozen different kind of angels, archangels, and various other kind of angels. I view things a little bit differently, and I don't feel compelled to have others believe as I do. I just tell you my feeling, okay?
But sure, that's the only way you can. Go ahead.
My experience is that I'm an eternal being that existed for eons and ages, if you will, before I was born. And that I'm now passing through a mortal experience, even though I'm still a spiritual being. And at death or at transition, I transition back into another realm, and my mortal life may end, but I continue to exist. And so there's this continuum of existence. And so when I think about spirits or guides or angels or whatever other words you want to use, I experience them simply as people who are not embodied in mortal flesh right now. And so I communicate with them in that way. They talk to me. They still have a personality. They still have things that matter to them. They still have priorities. They talk to me like human beings. They talk to me in a form that I understand, at least, that I'm comfortable with and familiar with. And so, yeah, angels. My brother's an angel, and other people. Tamara, Jeff Olson's deceased wife, I consider her an angel. She's a spirit. For me, they're the same thing.
Right. Well, I'm a professional evidential medium, so I understand. I like spirit people. To me, they're us. They're us, just without vessels, and they're a higher level of vibration because they're not stuck in this world stuff, and so they're just a flow of love and honesty, and sometimes they're very funny. And you can always tell that no matter who they were, they just come clean, and they're like, yeah, I didn't see it at the time. So they probably, to me, I love spirit people because they're beautiful. They're our higher state. It's who we are. So it's who we're going to be again very soon. We're not here that long.
When I encounter spirits, I experience profound, ineffable love and oneness and a flow of knowledge that's inexplicable. On occasion, when my brothers come to me, he's taken me places, and I've experienced a life review. So I have experienced many of the elements of the out-of-body experience that near-death experiencers describe, but I haven't had a physical death that accompanied those things. I had them independent of physical death.
This is really important because a lot of people ask me, how can I get that feeling right? You don't really have to die for that to happen. You can, to me, I'm thinking surrender, being a state of gratitude, and just kind of like, what if, and be willing to be a student and to be shown. So maybe for people that are watching, to explain how you connect, that they can maybe have like you said, you saw a life review, because I think you can have like, this is where I am now, and you can be shown that, and you can get an assessment.
I agree. Years and years ago, I'd have these profound spiritual experiences, I'd have a messenger come and tell me something and tell me you need to deliver this message to so-and-so, one of my friends, for example. This guide came to me and told me what I needed to tell this friend of mine. And I said, well, who are you? And he said, I'm his brother. I didn't know this friend of mine had a deceased brother. And I asked him, I said, well, why don't you just go tell him? And the messenger said he wouldn't receive it from me. I said, oh, okay. So I think it was a day or two later, the next day, or maybe 2 days later, I'm talking with this friend. And I was really apprehensive about it because I didn't tell people about my spiritual proclivities. And I was uncomfortable. And so I asked him, we're talking, I said, tell me about your family. And he tells, and he mentions his brother. He had several brothers, but he mentioned the one. I said, you have a deceased brother? And he goes, yeah. And at that time I thought, oh, okay, that's one good click in the right direction.
Yeah, that's good.
And I was really reluctant. And I said, I didn't tell him that his brother came to me and gave me a message. Rather, what I said is, I was thinking about you the other night and I had this feeling that somebody was close by, and I had this message that came into my mind, and I shared it with him. And he said, oh yeah, that's my brother. He knew by the content of the message.
Yes, of course.
And
yeah.
I said, well, why didn't he just come tell you? And this friend of mine said, oh, I wouldn't have received it from him. I thought, oh, wow.
And that's exactly what they told you. But
yeah.
I love how you did that. And I think this is really important. You knew that if you were direct and said blah, 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 it might have freaked him out. So you said, I kind of got this feeling, and I don't know, but blah, 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 and what if, and he received it that way.
I learned over the years that some people you can talk to very directly about your experiences, and they'll say, yeah, I understand. I've been there. I know what you're talking about. Other people are very skeptical, and it's okay to talk to them with different words and different phrases that they're comfortable with. Because the key is to meet people where they are and share with them truth in such a way as to help them realize they've always known it. When they have this aha, that feels good.
Okay, say that again,
yeah,
Jeff.
right. You're remembering.
You broke up, so say that last part again, because it was really important, and I don't want to miss it. Say that last part about communicating. Our little thing went kind of haywire.
I learned a long time ago that it's important to meet people where they are.
Yes.
And share truth with them in such a way as to cause them to realize they've always known it.
Yes. Yes, that's true. Well, we're spiritual beings, but we have forgotten, and between lives and in between, we forget. So it's funny. I just asked Spirit to stop messing with your Zoom or your side. I did, because that's what they're doing, and I get that a lot. And instantly, the minute you're talking about Spirit, did you notice your stuff started messing up? I said, would you let Jeff do his interview, please? So they're like, okay. So we probably won't have any more problems. I love how when they draw close like that, it's funny when I think of Spirit, I think about, there's so much more than that, but I think about a room full of very happy little puppies that are just wanting to be close to you, like they're just joyful. That's what I think about. They come close. So now with your brother, how did that, I want to talk about the shared near-death experience and also the one with Jeff, because these are just so fascinating to me. And I also, you as a soul being, how you've evolved as a spirit being from the awarenesses and the personal experiences, the personal, spiritually transformed experiences. But I know that still keeps going on. I know that continues because we're spiritual beings, but start with your brother, and because you were a little youngster then. So how did that all register?
It didn't register initially.
Okay.
In fact, although I witnessed the agony of my parents when my brother died, it made me sad, but I didn't think that it had that big of impact on me. I thought I got through it unscathed. And then 20 years later, my brother came to me.
Really?
And he said, you have to go talk with our mother because there's things she's never told you about my death. And I thought that was really odd, but I listened to what he said, and I went and sat down with my mother, and we had a long conversation, just the two of us. And she told me that day for the very first time, she said, before Stan died, I always knew where you were in the house because I could hear you singing. When your brother died, you stopped singing.
Oh,
And
really?
then I realized that his death had a big psychic impact on me. It changed me. When I was 16, I was driving a car much too fast late at night on a windy, narrow country road. No seatbelt. There were two friends in the car with me.
Not good.
And a friend of mine, this voice spoke to me. And it wasn't just a voice in my ears. It was like it wrapped itself around my soul. And I
I get
experienced
that. I get that.
And the voice said, you need to slow down. And despite being a rebellious teenager who would not have listened to any authority figure, I listened to that voice and I slowed down. I went around a corner. We hit a Cadillac head on. There was a lot of damage to the vehicle, but no injuries. I think I would have died that night if I hadn't have slowed down. And it took me a while to realize I wouldn't have listened to anybody, my parents, law enforcement. I've joked that I wouldn't have listened to God if he'd have been sitting in the seat next to me.
Mhm.
But I always listened to my older brother. I loved my older brother and I trusted him. And I realized that was the voice that spoke to me, was my older brother that saved my life that night.
Wow, that's beautiful. I mean, that really is how heaven is so close, to be able to give you a message of really love. He wanted you to go on and continue on. So at least you listen.
At least I listened.
At least you listen.
In fact, I learned to listen over time, because when I was 19, I don't remember a lot of the experiences in the interim between 16 and 19, but I remember when I was 19, I approached this friend of mine. She was a few years older and she had a lot of experience, and I trusted her for some reason. And I grew up in a Christian tradition. I asked her a question that, using the language that was available to me as a Christian teenager, without giving her any context at all for my question, I said, does God ever speak to you in sentences?
Yeah, what'd she
She looked at
say?
me with this really knowing look, really sincere look, and she said, don't ever doubt that. That was all she said. Don't ever doubt
Really?
that.
Hmm.
And so I've tried to honor that advice.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if we're going to have a connection, what form do we think it's going to come? I mean, it could come in multiple forms: symbols, signs, telepathy. It could be, it's not really for us to judge. I mean, it's funny. I'll have people sometimes, well, I'd really like a sign. And then when they get it, they get freaked out. I'm like, well, I thought you wanted one. So that's, that's definitely a good sign. Now, when you talk to your mom about this, did it also kind of affect her too? Like, was there a healing there for her? Was there anything that were you able to ever speak to I'm curious, your mom about your brother communicating? Did you ever feel comfortable enough?
We talked a little bit about it, but a few years ago when my book came out, not yet, my memoir about some of my spiritual experiences in the emergency department, my parents both read that book and they asked me, they said, why didn't we know any of these things about you?
Really? And what did you say? I'm curious. Oh boy.
Well, I didn't feel like I could talk about it for the longest time, for most of my life.
Yeah.
Sometimes it felt like it was too sacred to talk about. Sometimes it felt like maybe I would jeopardize my professional reputation and my career as a physician if I spoke about it. And for various reasons, it just didn't feel right. And then a few years ago, when I stopped seeing patients in the emergency department, about 6 months after I stopped seeing patients, I just woke up one day and something clicked in my soul, and I knew that it was okay to share. And that's when I first started to speak about these experiences.
Wow.
6 months later, I'd published my book, and then I was on my way to my very first public speaking engagement in Salem, Massachusetts, and I had a stack of books in my suitcase. I was in the airport, and this young couple came and sat down next to me in the Delta Lounge and started asking the usual airport questions. And when she got to the one, what are you going to be speaking about? And I told her, her whole countenance kind of changed, and she looked at me and she said, my grandfather just died, and he's come to me a couple of times. And my
That's
initial thought was,
fantastic.
why would you say something so intimate and personal to a total stranger? And then I realized I was a safe place, and she
Yes,
trusted me. She knew
absolutely.
I'd believe her.
Mm-hmm.
So she took one of my books. She went and caught her plane. I went and got on my plane. At that point in my life, I estimated that I'd seen in excess of 60,000 patients in the ER.
Wow.
And on the plane to Boston, that voice that spoke to my heart said, "You will help more people with this book than you helped as a physician in the emergency department."
Wow,
And
that's saying a lot.
that shifted my whole perspective about what the next chapter of my life was about.
And what so? I'm curious. So was it a permission thing? Like, okay, then let's do
Yeah,
this.
in the emergency department, I was helping people heal their physical bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And that transitioned me in a way that I realized I was going to help people heal their souls, because people read my book and they come up to me and they want to talk about it and they share their own
Right.
experiences. When I speak publicly afterwards, people come up and they want to talk to me, and I can see how it changes them to realize, oh, other people have these experiences too. Oh, it helps them heal their spiritual wounds somehow. And so now, in addition to my public speaking, I do one-on-one mentoring with people all over the world via Zoom now. I have clients in at least 10 countries on 5 continents that I mentor spiritually to help them hear their own voice, to help them achieve their own higher self, to step into the most authentic pathway and find their own answers.
This is, I have to sit here and go, oh my gosh, this is not synchronicity. So before our interview, there was a lady who wanted this very same, and I keep being told to do the same thing you're doing. And it's because it's freeing people to do what they came here to do, and to have to give them permission. Well, it's a lot more than that, but permission to be able to move forward. But it's funny because that's just confirmation. So you know how God works, or the divine.
Yeah.
It's never a mistake. And so now let's talk about your book too while we're talking about it. Let me put it up here. Your book. Tell us just an overview of it sounds like when people see or read your book that they feel freer to be able to talk about their own experiences, it sounds like.
Yes, it kind of validates people's experiences and seems to give them permission to talk a little bit about their own. The average near-death experiencer waits 7 years to talk much about their experience because they're so cautious about it. They're worried about how it'll be received. That book, like I say, for 25 years in the ER, I never spoke about these things. And when I felt like it was okay to talk about them, and I wrote that book, it's about many of the experiences I had in the ER. Sometimes I saw souls leave their bodies when they died, and they'd express their profound gratitude for the care that was being provided, and they'd be so grateful and so filled with love before they left.
That's so beautiful.
And so that award you saw on the front cover of it when you put it up, that's a best of state award. I won best of state for nonfiction book that year when I published it.
Fantastic. Wow. And then you have the foreword by Jeffrey Olson. Wow. That's amazing. So when this came, was that really the launch of the new you with the book, when you felt free to just come out and just freely talk about these experiences?
Yes, what happened was I'd do these speaking engagements and I'd shared my book, and then people would want to get together with me and talk about my book. And we'd have these conversations, usually over lunch. And during the conversations, I'd have these experiences where it would be given me things I was supposed to say to the person, or I would have some discernment into their own spiritual gifts that were often latent and sometimes unrecognized even by the person that I was talking to. And I'd help them recognize their spiritual gifts. I'd walk them back through their life to their own experiences that sometimes they failed to appreciate, and I'd help them recognize what had happened. And it gives them validation. It enables them to trust their own experiences. And then sometimes I give them some simple little exercises to do to practice. And as I started to do that, I realized that my meetings often were far bigger than the book. They were meetings about people finding their own spiritual self, their own divine, innate being.
Yes. Wow, that's so important what you're doing there, because I think that it's in this world, it's not like the other side, and you have traps and traps and traps, and somewhere in there is the authentic you. So being able to help that, and I think it's also a gift, a ministering gift, to be able to encourage and get messages like that. So that's a gift that you give to people. I noticed on your website you mentioned something about lunch, which of course that's pre-pandemic, but
Yeah.
a lunch, because you're saying that would unravel their mission, their spiritual gifts.
Yeah, I started this thing called Lunch with Jeff. And it was basically, buy me a nice lunch in a restaurant and I'll give you 2 hours of my time. And we'll talk about anything you want to talk about, the book, your own spiritual gifts, whatever you want. And I've had about 100 people take me up on that, and I've had wonderful experiences. For a long time, I thought I could only experience it in person, in the same room.
Right.
And then, and I invited people to come to Salt Lake. Some people flew to Salt Lake to meet with me. But one person in Texas couldn't afford to come, and she was very insistent. She wanted to have a meeting. So we did it via telephone. This was before I knew anything about Zoom. And I had a profound spiritual experience on the phone. I understood what I was supposed to say to this woman. We had this wonderful conversation. And the next day, I was texting with a friend of mine in Hawaii who was going through some really rough times. And Spirit told me what to write in the text. It wasn't anything I would have written. And it was exactly what she needed. And then I realized, oh, I don't have to be in person. It doesn't matter what kind of technology I'm using.
No, no, that's absolutely true. Well, spirit people, they don't need to have a chair. They don't need to be in a room.
Spirit doesn't need a telephone.
It says any telephone, but some people forget we're spirit, so we don't need that either. I don't know about you, but I do this. Sometimes I'll visit people at night with their permission, and I'll just have a chat with them because they're not receptive, and as humans here, and to be able to have a chat, and they'll just think it's a crazy dream, and I'm ministering to them, to their soul. Whatever works.
We ministered to each other in unusual ways. One of the most profound experiences I had in the emergency department wasn't with somebody who was dying. It was with a homeless man who had cold, wet feet. He was walking around in the snow with holes in his shoes. His clothing was tattered and soiled. His hair was unkempt. He struggled with addictions. And I filled a wash basin full of warm water and put some soap in it and grabbed a wash rag, and I sat down at the foot of the gurney. And I took off his shoes and I removed the last threads of his socks because his feet were in rough shape from walking around in cold, wet shoes. And I lowered his feet into the water and I washed his feet. And
beautiful.
As I was doing it, everything that was physical or temporal or earthly was drawn back, and I saw his soul. I saw his divine nature, and I was in the presence of the divine. And see, I'd gone in there thinking I was there to serve him, and I realized this man who was the antithesis of everything the world defines as success had come to minister to me. Because I viewed every soul differently from that day forward, because I realized we're always sitting next to God, whether we're sitting in church or in the gutter. That's who we are.
But what an act of humility and passion, much like when Jesus's feet was being washed, and the fact that in that moment, because you surrendered and you helped, that you were blessed. What do they say? What does the Bible say about entertaining angels and you don't realize it? I mean, we don't really know. It's just we label ourselves and people sometimes we shouldn't, and like, oh, there's the homeless person, when in fact it's it is another soul. And you think, well, what do they serve the purpose here? Maybe it's the role of things can be worse.
Well, for me, I have said about that gentleman in the ER, if he did nothing else with his entire life other than the gift he gave me that day, his life was a profound success. So
Right.
we're here to help each other, and we all do it in different ways.
Yes. Well, I love this being, how you're giving examples of being of service and sharing, and it's really an organic thing. It's like what your heart is kind of compelled to do. And I think people think a little bit too difficult or too hard about it and they make it complicated. But if you follow your heart, then God or Spirit will take you where you need to go. I'm curious, when you were washing your feet at that moment, you had the spiritual experience with this man. Was it like a mirror back into your own soul? What happened there?
It is very much like a mirror into your own soul, because when you realize that other people are divine beings, you realize that you are as well. And in fact, shortly after I published my book, I was scrolling through Facebook because somebody told me if you're going to publish a book, you have to be on Facebook. So I said, okay. So I got on Facebook. So one day I'm scrolling through Facebook and I see this beautiful meme, and it's this elaborate mirror, and at the top of it, or at the bottom, I don't remember which, it says, the hardest place to see God is in the mirror. And I remember thinking, that's beautiful. That sounds so familiar. And I scrolled down to the bottom of the meme, and it was attributed to me. It was out of my book. I thought, oh, no wonder that sounds familiar.
Oh my gosh, that is so funny.
So,
That is so funny.
So totally what you say, yes, those experiences help us realize who we are. But we've been conditioned to diminish ourselves, to play small, to be less than what we are, rather than looking in the mirror and seeing a divine being.
No, I agree. And there's one of the things that I see that it seems to be consistent is that it's not so much, messages are important to people, and especially if they're divinely inspired. But I keep seeing a common thing of people just don't feel worthy. But the thing is, we're here. We're worthy. I mean, if we weren't meant to be here and have a task at hand, even if it's just to show love to one another, then we wouldn't be here. So we are worthy because we're here. God placed us here. So, but I see that a lot. It makes me sad because I see the beauty in people's eyes and I see God in their eyes. So when I see they think poorly of themselves, it makes me sad because I want to just embrace them and tell them that, stop it. I don't know who got you like this, but just stop it right now because you're really loved. But I think enough people don't hear that.
We live in a community that has kind of pounded this message into people that you are what you do, that you are the sum total of your actions. And the religious community is in many ways supported that you are what you do. But that's not what I teach my clients. I teach my clients, you are what you are. And what you are is a divine being of infinite, unchanging worth. And so when you understand who you are, you realize that your actions are just something that you do, but they don't change who you are. So if you do something and it has an untoward outcome, you don't think of yourself as a failure. You think of yourself as a divine being of infinite worth who made a decision that had an unpleasant outcome, and I'm going to make a different decision next time. It doesn't affect my worth.
Right, absolutely. Well, and the other thing is, I think that a lot of people don't realize that they are spiritual beings. That's the first start, and that they're not their bodies. That they are also we're multidimensional beings. That's why, to me, I believe our natural state is spirit, and that's why talking to spirit is very natural to me because they're not creepy. That's what we are, and that's our higher form, being free. Like that. So
right now we're living in an illusion that we're something less. But what you say is true. We're divine beings. We're spirit beings. I'm friends with Raymond Moody, who coined the term NearDeath Experience.
Yes.
And Raymond told me that for 40 years, while he was studying and writing about near-death experiences, he retained skepticism about the afterlife. He wasn't willing to admit there was an afterlife. It was when he heard about the experience of Jeff Olson and myself and me seeing Tamara in the trauma room. He said when he read my book, he surrendered and he acknowledged that there is indeed an afterlife. And that was the tipping point for him when he read my book.
Are you kidding? Really? That's saying a lot. That's with all his research and so forth. Wow. That is, well, but then you have the shared near-death experience, which you don't hear too much about. And to me, that gives it even more credence, because then you have two people validating that. Yeah, Dr. Raymond Moody actually was the time at the Afterlife Conference I went, he was being given an award. And that was when Jeff Olson was there. So
Right.
they were both there at that time. So that's when I met him, and my name popped up like, oh, that was, you're Tamara. So when you saw his wife, Tamara, was she from your viewpoint, was she a solid? Was she, I'm sure people want to know, what was it, how did that appear to you? Her soul appear to you?
Generally, when I experience that, they have at least a physical shape or physical form. They're not physical, they're spiritual, but they
Yes.
still have a form that's familiar to us as physical beings. But the people that I encounter appear to be in the form that is perfect for them, that is their prime, if you will. On one occasion, I was taking care of an elderly woman. I actually wasn't taking care of her, another doctor was, but I was in the room, and she passed. And when she left her body, I instantly recognized who she was, but she appeared to be about half the age of the
Oh
body
yeah.
that she just came out of.
Oh yeah.
And she was in perfect form, and that's the way Tamara was. She had beautiful flowing hair, blonde curly hair, and she seemed to be perfect. And she wasn't translucent like you see depicted in a movie. She seemed like she was solid, and yet I could see what was beyond her, even though I couldn't see through her, if you will. And I walked over and I looked down at Jeff, and I looked at his badly injured leg and checked the pulse in his foot. Checked his pulse and looked down at him. I could still see Tamara standing in the air behind me, because I could see in all directions at the same time.
Yes.
And you get there's this flood of knowledge and this ineffable love and gratitude that is all part of the experience.
Well, I think also too, what did Jesus say? Be love, give love, receive love. The receiving love's the difficult part. Giving, I think, is easier. And being the love is definitely not always easy. It's something definitely to think about. But it's funny when you said in that moment, I think that you were being loved by Spirit, allowing you to open up and supporting you in the love for you, because they knew that you were going to carry the story, the voice of the people that have crossed over and give this message of love and hope. So they were sharing that love to you and opened your spiritual eyes even more. And, I think it's a continual thing that keeps happening, but definitely in that moment, there was, when you were saying you're seeing in all directions, I think that was the love for you from them to be able to, and they're still doing that. God, there's no limits to what Spirit can do if we just allow that. It's funny when I've seen them, I always say, heaven's full of hot looking people, because grandmothers come through and I'm like, they didn't remember you like that, with the little waist, the cute little outfit. And I'm like, but it cracks me. I say, okay, just show me for a minute how they remember you. Okay, now, if you want to tell them what you look like now, and they go, oh yeah, we got a picture of that. But that's great news that we pick our glorified body, whatever that may be. But I see them with a light force, like a light and emanating. They're not see-through, but they have a light force. They look very glowy to me, and they're a higher vibration. But I like being around that, because it's more higher energy than generally us here. So I tend to like being around spirit people. But the fact that you have studied and you have all these amazing medical skills, but then you're also willing to look at the spiritual side of things, says a lot about you and your character. And, you just wonder how many doctors out there that experience these things that are afraid to say something. Have you talked to
Yeah,
other doctors?
or they don't recognize what they've experienced. I have an acquaintance who's an oncologist, and oncologists have a lot of patients that transition. And she told me she felt she'd never had a shared death experience or anything like that. She knew about my experience, and she said she'd like to experience it. And as we started to visit more, she told me about this one patient who was just dying as she arrived at the patient's bedside, and she said she felt them leave. And I said, "Whoa, wait a minute." I said, "You felt them leave?" And she goes, "Yeah." I said, "That's a shared death experience. You've had a shared death experience."
Oh, yeah.
And I helped walk her through it. I helped her recognize what she was feeling, what she was experiencing, so that next time she'd recognize it more clearly and she could open herself up to greater understanding of it.
No, that makes sense now, because to me, that should give even more importance and credence to what they're doing, helping people. They're not just helping their body, but it's also in that moment being a human being, and there's a soul there.
Yeah.
So it kind of, to me, it would give the work a lot more importance. Have you ever talked before? I'm sure you've talked before doctors. What do they feel about this, that now that you've come out with your book? And
I've spoken to a few doctors, not very many about it. I'd love to speak to more. I haven't spoken to a lot of my colleagues about it, a few, but not many, because I published the book after I stopped practicing medicine, after I stopped seeing patients in the ER. So,
right. I you know what? It's funny what and who knows what things are going to come up, but I really get that that's going to happen. I don't know. I think times are changing, and that maybe after this next year that there's going to be emerging with medical and spiritual. I don't know the right words for that, but you will be asked to symposiums to go over this phenomenon, whatever. And that's a great thing, because people need to understand this is a real thing that happens and that people aren't crazy. So
I have a whole different presentation that I give when I'm speaking to medical professionals. It's based in literature. It's talking about the biology, the anatomy, the physiology of it all. And I actually put together. Pardon?
Go ahead. You're kind of breaking up there. So I want to kind of recap that, because that part kind of broke up. I told those spirit people to leave you alone for a little bit. But so you put together something that's more in a way that they can understand, that's more breaking it down, what's going on. Is that the process?
When physicians go to a conference, they want to talk about the science. They want to talk about the biochemistry and the proposed mechanisms, and they don't want to talk about a bunch of unscientific stuff. So I actually put together a conference for physicians, a physician's perspective on near-death experiences. All of the speakers are MDs and MD PhDs. And I had it accredited through a medical school for continuing medical education. And then COVID hit. So I have it all lined up. I'm just waiting for COVID to calm down enough to select a venue and a date.
Okay. So this is, I mean, I can't help it. I'm just saying, this is what's going to happen for you. And it's going to be a movement. I see it more toward late spring, and it's going to start. You're going to start doing things online, but it's going to really pick up and roll. And it's like not 2021 will start, 2022 is there's a new wave, I think, because people are just more open and the time is right, the timing. But it's so funny because you've done your own thing and now it's going to kind of recircle back, but it's a good thing. So it'll feel right, is what I'm saying. So that's cool. I mean, I love what you're doing right now, and you're speaking out, and you're getting people to wake up to their own soul and acknowledge that. I want to talk about also, I mean, there's so many things I want to ask you, but I want to talk about your art, because your art is amazing. So how did that happen with the process? And is your art, I mean, it's beautiful, but is it is it an escape? Is it, I mean, how do you use your art? What does it mean to you?
Well, I sculpt and I paint.
I've got some samples
And,
here. You can
and
put one up.
both the sculptures and the paintings, there's one of the paintings, are available on my website, jeffodriscoll.com. Also, helpingsoulsheal.com goes to the same website. And I can sit down at a blank canvas without any preconceived notion of what it's going to be and start painting. And frequently within an hour or two, I can look at it and say it's done and stand up and walk away. And most of my painting is abstract. This is kind of more impressionistic. This is more abstract. But when I feel it, I just put it on the canvas, and when it's done, and I walk away.
Here's another one here. So when you're doing this, do you feel like that, I mean, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I'm curious. To me, I'm getting some form of channeling. What's going on?
I guess that could be the case. Sometimes I feel in spirit while I'm doing the work.
Right.
And in that regard, perhaps there is some degree of channeling there. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but I'm open to that notion.
Well, I mean, you're just getting influenced because, it's funny when I see this and, you say it looks blurry, but if we put a focus in it, it could almost be like, I look at this piece and they almost remind me of happy spirit people.
Interesting. Maybe.
Yeah. And then here, this to me looks like, to me it looks like you're in heaven and you're walking through and you're talking to a group of people, but it's a beautiful spring day and there's flowers and you're talking and you're walking by and
I think one of the reasons I like abstract art is because it enables people to see what's right for them to see at that moment for them.
Right. But it does. It's true. You're right. Now, I want to talk about this piece, which is amazing. It's one of my favorites. I just love it.
This is a piece originally sculpted by Walker Hancock, who was quite literally one of the monuments men at the end of World War II. He and in the Army were commissioned to go gather up art and preserve art. And he was from Pennsylvania. 1,400 Pennsylvania railroad workers died in World War II. And in the 30th Street Station in Philadelphia is the 39-foot statue that he sculpted, this statue right here. And I wanted a smaller one for my friend. It was his birthday. He was a veteran. He was from Philly area, and he loved this piece. And I asked somebody to sculpt it for me, and initially they said yes, and then they said they couldn't do it because of copyright restrictions. He said, if you want to do it, you can, but I can't do it. And so this is my first piece. This is how I learned to sculpt, with this piece right here. It's 39 inches tall. It's 1/12 scale. And I gave it to my friend for his birthday. He was speechless, which made me feel good.
I mean, this is just so soulful and beautiful. I mean, and I'm looking here at almost underneath. Is this grass under? Is this supposed to be grass where the feet are?
It's supposed to represent a fire. It's
a fire.
It's Michael the Archangel lifting a fallen soldier from the flames of war.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I got it. Beautiful.
And interestingly enough, I wrote to the U.S. Copyrights and Patents Office, and I told them everything about the original. I told them what I was doing, and they told me the original's in the public domain, and I had every right to have a copyright on my version, and they issued a copyright. So with the copyright on my version, I cast some additional ones and sold them, and if people are interested, they can reach me through my website
Are you serious?
if they want to get one.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. That's fantastic. I didn't think it said that on your website. Okay, so if you want to purchase this, you can just to email you.
Yeah.
Correct? That is absolutely beautiful. Now, is all your collections of sellable art items on your website?
except for the ones that are already sold, and they're
Okay.
marked. The ones that are sold are already marked. And
And do you send prints out? Do you sell copies, or are they all originals?
they're all originals. I could do prints. That's not something I've done yet, but I could do it. But the ones that are on my website are all original. Most of them are acrylic on canvas. I think there's one oil on canvas on there.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lady that was on my show that does channeled spirit art and so forth anyway, but you could make copies, because is what, some people want, original, some people want the other, and it would spread the joy. It's not a bad idea. Even you could photograph this, people that want to get that or a lesser version. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Share a little bit of Jeff with all the art with that. Sure, why not? I mean, they're beautiful.
And you know
So,
what? I never thought I was artistic. I started painting just kind of on a whim, maybe 10 years ago. And a year or two later, I took up the sculpting because that was the only way to make the sculpture for my friend. There was no small version of it. There was no maquette. I looked everywhere. Nobody had done it as far as I could tell, so I had to do it myself. And up until my sculpting and painting, I never thought of myself as being artistic. And I never thought of myself as a writer either. The same time I published my book, Not Yet, I also published a novel, Who Buried Achilles, and it's on my website as well. And it's about a broken soul and his spiritual journey to wholeness. It's a powerful book. I think it's my best writing, actually.
really? Okay. Tell us a little bit about that, because I didn't know all that. That sounds cool. It's about a broken soul and
Yeah,
finding
it's
his
about
way.
somebody that had a horribly abusive childhood, and it had horrendously negative consequences on him. And he finally meets his estranged father that he hasn't seen in 30 years. And when his father starts to talk, he says things that the main character never knew, and it changes his whole perspective on life and the world and himself. I wrote it as a feature-length screenplay first, and then I went back and rewrote it as a novel so I could share it with more people.
Wow, that sounds amazing. It sounds like it would do both so well. Maybe you should go back and also add it as a movie type thing too, to be able to be a script.
Well, yeah, it is a script. I have the
You've got it.
there it is right there.
Okay. So if somebody's interested, they need to do this.
Right there.
Right. So it's ready to go if someone wants a script, because I'd like to see this in a movie. I was talking to a lady the other day from South Africa, and I was talking about, she was, about reading or something. She goes, well, I can't. I said, why can't you read? She said, I'm horribly dyslexic, so I have to listen to audiobooks or movies. And that never registered to me before. And I thought, well, that would be a reason why we need to have audiobooks and also movies of things, because of learning disabilities that I never really thought about. So they're just more forms of communication. And I wanted to ask you about let's get back to, I love what you're doing, how you as a spiritual being are igniting other people and directing them on their path. How do you feel where we are, and not to put you on the spot, but I just want to get your feelings. Where do you think we are as a world, as a humanity, and where do you think we're going? I think it's a positive thing, but it's a healing thing. But where do you think, and what do you think we need the most right now?
Well, what we need most, of course, is love and tolerance. I hear a lot of naysayers saying negative things about where we are as a race, as humankind, and things. I don't feel that way. I'm pretty much an optimist about things. I think we're right where we're supposed to be. We're right on our path, going in the direction we're supposed to be going, learning the things that we're supposed to be learning. And as we know better, we'll do better. And that's okay, because we're here to experience it all. It's available to us to experience. And I asked Source once, why are we here?
Yeah.
And the answer came back, it's easy to love people when you see their divine nature. You're here to learn to love them when you can't see their divine nature. And
Yes.
we're here to learn to love.
I agree. That is the hardest part. I agree. Even for me, if someone's really lashing out or being mean to others, and you're like, how do you show grace to that person who is who's acting, childish or disruptive, or how do you do that? And that is the challenge. It's not for people that are loving.
Yeah, it is a challenge. What helped me was when I finally got to the point where I could genuinely, honestly say, I don't understand your path, but that's okay, because I don't have to understand it. I don't have to justify it or rationalize it or explain it. It's not my path. It's your path. All I have to do is honor it. And when I finally got to where I could say that and mean it, then I let go of the judgment. I didn't have to decide whether somebody else was on the right path or not. They're on their path.
Yes.
And my job is to honor their path.
I get that. It's funny. My teacher is Jesus, because I saw him over there in my near-death experience, and he's been talking a lot about judgment to me, and it's not what I think it is, but it's about honoring all life, and about not putting them on human terms, but seeing beyond that, and about giving them consideration and honor and grace, because that's what you would want too. And so people, what he was saying is, it stops you from enlightenment when you start making assessments. I'm not, about someone. And he said, because you wouldn't want that either. Yeah. So he's been having this, I'm still in this cycle with him. He's still going through stuff. This is something we're working on now. So he's showing me different viewpoints of that whole thing that I actually never really thought about it. But it's actually a trap. It traps people in. Is what
yeah, there are all kinds of traps. And I finally learned one time that the challenge is that we want to label things.
Mm-hmm.
And before you can label anything, you have to judge it to make sure the label's correct, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
And the problem is we're not very good at labeling.
At all.
We're not very good at telling whether things are good or bad. We tend to think, for example, that good health is a good thing. But what if good health teaches you to be arrogant and be completely without empathy for people that suffer? What if your cancer teaches you how to be empathetic and kind?
Yes.
Is the cancer a bad thing? See, we thought all kinds of things as being good and bad, and when you get down to it and you look at both sides of the issue, we're not very good usually at judging what's good or bad or labeling it.
No, I understand that, and I know that if we are, and we are eternal spiritual beings, and we're multidimensional beings that's beyond time and space, then something doesn't really get us down the way we think it is. It's just a part of the journey that we need. It's funny, I had people ask me, why would someone agree to, like you said, cancer? I don't really think it's that. I think that they agree beforehand on a journey that maybe makes them more humble, or whatever the thing is. I don't think they know what the lesson is. I don't think they give that away.
Right.
Right.
I talk with a lot of women, for example. Many of them have been in really bad first marriages. They had an abusive husband. They had, financial difficulties. They had 3 kids while they were married, and all these other things that made their life really, really difficult. And they talk about this horrible marriage that they had in the past. And I'll ask them often, I'll say, knowing everything you know about that horrible, difficult experience, would you do it again if that's what you had to do to get your children? Without exception, every one of them said, oh yes, I'd absolutely do it again if I had to get my children. And I'll say, then don't ever call it a bad marriage. Look at all the good that came out of it. You would do it again if you needed to get your children. And see, it's the labeling that we, rather than think of it as a bad marriage, sit down and make a list of all the good things that came out of the marriage, all the things you learned, all the things you're grateful for, even though you're not happy for the horrible stuff. And see, it totally changes our perspective. This is a good time of year to talk about this, making a gratitude list. What are you thankful for from this horrible experience?
Yes.
Because when we're grateful, it moves us from pain to power. It moves us from suffering to solace. It moves us from hurting to healing. Gratitude is a profound key in our spiritual progression.
I agree. It's a shift of your mindset. You know, it's funny, we had to move the interview because I have a heart patient, Shih Tzu, who I'm totally in love with. So I used to beg God, please keep him here. But I changed it. And I get up every morning and go, I am so grateful he's still here. Look at that little fuzzy face. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so grateful that I got to know him, because he's a rescue. I got to know him. And I just thank you so much for this joy. I mean, if someone gave me a 2-week all-paid vacation to Hawaii, I wouldn't go. I'd stay with a dog. It's the little thing. So it's keeping in that grateful, what gratitude that you can and what you do have. So it has to be a mindful thing. And you know what I mean? You could easily go into the world and what they think. So I'm with you there. So I'm with you. I agree with you where we are now. I feel like that people are waking up. They're being more considerate. They're looking at the whole world. They're asking, because they've had the time, right? They've had the time to reflect because they've stayed at home. Like, who am I? Why am I here? And it may feel like birth pains to some people, but it's necessary and it's a good thing, because hopefully we can all become more soulful. That's what I'm saying, that we need to get down to basics and kind of why we're here, which is we're really supposed to be kind to one another and love one another and not be so at odds. So
yeah, we want to make it so difficult, but it's really not. Oh, well, I take that back. We want to make it so complicated, but it's not complicated. It's very simple. It's not easy. It's difficult, but it's simple.
Yes. Right. Well, Jesus says, he told me 2 weeks ago, he goes, people just overcomplicate things. And I'm like, it is very simple, but working toward that love, I see that the difficulty sometimes is loving other people more than you love yourself. And then we go back to that too. But every breath that we have is a reason to be grateful, because it's a gift,
Yep.
and I'm sure you saw that so much with your career and so forth. Well, I tell you, you just have a wealth of information. Tell people how to get a hold of you. So if they are interested in some spiritual counseling or some beautiful spiritual artwork, the best way, and I'll also have it down below too.
There's 2 ways to my website. One of them is simply jeffodriscoll.com. But if you can't remember how to spell my name, it's helpingsoulsheal.com.
Oh.
And you can find my art. You can find my books domestically on there. If you want my novel or not yet internationally, you can get it on Amazon. And if you have Amazon Prime, you don't have to pay for shipping. But if you're domestic and you want my books, and my children's books are on there as well, and my artwork. And if you have any questions about it, if you want to schedule some time with me or something, you can do it through my website.
Perfect. One quick thing, you just kind of threw in the children's books. Tell us real quick about that, just so people know, because you kind of threw that in there.
I was riding along with my 3-year-old granddaughter. It was 4 years ago, almost to the day. It might have been today, actually. We were going someplace for Thanksgiving. And she said, "Papa, tell me a story." And we were in the car. So I had to make up the story. So I made up a story about Muck the Duck. And 3 days later, she was telling it in such detail. My wife said, "Jeff, you have to write that down." So I wrote it down, and then I got an illustrator. And it was so much fun. I did 5 more. So there's a series of 6.
Oh. That to me, what a great granddad. Oh my gosh, you're going to be like, that is just you're like the coolest granddad to do that, because I know she was delighted by it and will always just hold that to be true. And it also shows a spirit of play, and people have forgotten to laugh.
Yeah.
We need to laugh.
They're about 500 words each. They all have a good moral to them. Ringo the Dingo, for example, learns the lesson that you just sometimes have to say, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake."
Well, Ringo the Dingo, he's got it right.
Yeah, the art is beautiful. I found a great illustrator. So Yeah, they're on my website.
Oh, wow. Well, well, definitely everybody check that out. You have been such a delight. You are such a precious soul, and I thank you for being gracious to take your time with me and being patient with resetting this up with my sick puppy. So thank you so much, Jeff. I can't wait to see all the things that you're going to do. You're just very talented and very humble. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be with you.
Have a great evening. Thanks again. Take
Good night.
care. Good night.